Amazing. We're live. Elena, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Ben. Happy to be here.
Good to see you
I'm
too,
really excited
Ben.
to see you. I think it's our first time, definitely first time recording with you, first time chatting live. So really excited to dive in with you.
Yeah, I love it when internet friends become real friends and we get to have an actual conversations.
100%
Totally.
agreed. And yeah, I've been really excited to have this conversation. Maybe some context settings. So I believe it was like a month and a half ago, Elena joined the Supra community for a Q&A. And yeah, I think in my head, I was like, let's spend a lot of our time talking about like financial fluency, how to manage execs. But it was interesting, probably the question that ended up getting like the most interest. And then I think it kind
Hmm.
of hijacked in a positive way. The conversation was like, I think someone asked like, hey, how do I manage, a CEO that like drives the roadmap and the product direction completely based on God? And I think then that led to you kind of also like, you gave an amazing answer that became a blog post in your Substack. And then I think part of it too that also made you want to write this is I think maybe a couple of weeks later, you went to a conference and you saw like that theme emerge again. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious. Maybe like let's start there. Why do you think this question is maybe like so interesting and so prevalent right now in the product community?
Yeah, that's a great question. The way I'm thinking about it is, well, we're all dealing with it. So we're working with stakeholders. The stakes are high. Even the folks that are on the executive team, you're still not the CEO, you're one of the operators, so you're one of the employees. And so ideas come not only from you, from your team, from your users, but they're coming from sales, they're coming from marketing, they're coming from the CEO. And frequently, you put so much time and effort into communicating, into strategy and what you're doing, and they feel like out of the blue. So you're always like, but we've talked about this. What do you mean there's a new idea? And it can get really emotional and really frustrating for operators because you're constantly dealing with what feels sometimes like an attack or sometimes feels like a dumb idea or an idea that you now need to, in a way that doesn't get you fired, figure out if you should use or not within the company. And I don't know if things have changed, but I think because I'm coaching product managers, I'm in product circles, it's something we talk about. It's something that we start with a rant generally of like, oh, I can't believe I have to deal with this again. But then we start to unpack and we try to figure out what's behind it. We try to figure out, is it how the person's delivering it? Is it the question? Is it the listening? What's the question behind the question? I don't know. I don't know, Ben, if in your operator careers, it's something that you've dealt with, but I've talked to folks that have.
Yeah. I mean, look, like every startup I've been at, whether it's uh, towards kind of like the end of my full-time work journey before this chapter as a head of product at a 15-person Series A company or earlier on as like a first PM or even just like as a kind of somewhat entry level employee 35 at Life 360 in that environment, the CEOs are always opinionated. It's
Yeah.
always been founder CEOs in my experience. I think basically every startup I've worked at, the CEO was the founder too, or at least a co-founder. And yeah, I think early in my career, I really valued the clarity and like the push from the founder CEOs because like I wasn't really on the hook to like be a strategic leader
Mm.
myself. So it's great. There's a plan. Let's do what the CEO says, the founder CEO, like amazing. Whoever's somewhere between me and the CEO on the org chart has to has to deal with ironing out any disagreements. And then obviously as I moved up in my career and kind of got more and more senior to the point where I'm like running product, that's the point where when the CEO gets an idea that either feels at odds with something we've talked about before or feels somehow antithetical or maybe even like destructive to what we're trying to
Mm.
accomplish in some sense, that's where I'll be honest, I do get kind of like I do get an emotional reaction first
Yeah.
as I'm kind of because I'm what's happening. And I think what I talk to a lot of other people about is you kind of have this, you're constantly assembling and reassembling like the narrative in your head. So you've got this idea of where things are and where they're going. And then the moment a destabilizing piece of input comes in, especially if it comes from a severe source like the CEO, you have to re-underwrite the narrative in your head almost on the spot to figure out how it fits.
Yeah,
And
like
I think
re-underwrite and then get everybody else with that. So there's
but
that fallout too.
while applying your critical thinking to determining whether you agree with the need to re-underwrite or not. And I think that's the thing that can, for me, feel a little challenging. And I know I'm not alone, but I think that for me, that's the flavor that this takes. I'm curious what you think, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe just like even taking a step back, like I think sometimes, especially founder CEOs, undermine the power of their words and their suggestions. And I think like sometimes like I think that was like a big learning for me of like I think as like a head of product or member of the C-suite or the exec team, you have to get really good at like discerning of like how serious is this person about this suggestion? Because like I think as I was like earlier in like kind of my head of product role at a Series A startup, like I feel like a lot of times I reacted to information where like the CEO was just like had just gone to like a conference, had heard something, and it was just like a suggestion of like, I heard this, we should think about it. But sometimes there's more suggestions are like, no, like we're doing this.
Yeah, like an
and,
FYI.
and like, yeah, and like get behind it, and you know, like, and it's just like a order from me, and we're gonna do it. And I think the first step, I think, is like almost creating that shared language of like how serious and confident are you about this. And I feel like that maybe can catch like 60% of the problems. And then I think, Ben, what you were getting at is, okay, what do you do after like, no, it's actually like a pretty top-down suggestion and they wanted to do it, and actually there's maybe a misunderstanding or there's a piece of information that they have that I don't have that maybe will lead to that underwriting that you were describing.
Yeah, absolutely. I like Ben's framing on you have to constantly build things, and then with new information, you're like, all right, now it's leaning a little to the right. And then you also, the additional pieces, then you have to get your team to go with you. Otherwise, there's just going to be people going in multiple directions and no forward momentum. So that's the additional piece there.
Why do you think it's emotional? I'm curious in your take. Like it's actually something I've personally just tried to deconstruct for myself, but why does something that sounds like somewhat of an intellectual like exercise feel like emotional? Or why can't it feel emotional?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me personally, it sometimes feels like an attack or a level of, hey, I was hired to do a specific job, effectively translate what the CEO is saying, where the market is going, where the technology is going, into what do we do here at the company from a product perspective. And so you've come up with your plan, you've aligned the teams, you've shared roadmaps, and then someone's like, let me break all your Legos. And you're like, I had a plan. So it feels destabilizing. I think the second reason might be that vulnerability. You don't know what the outcomes are if you take this direction and move the company in that direction, or if you have a conversation with the CEO, get your data, facts, get your market research, and be like, hey, you know what? This isn't a good idea. Because at that point, you're still an employee that can be fired. So how much do you need to, like, how much do you flex that authority or lack of authority in the moment can feel very vulnerable. So then if you're in a position where you don't want to put your career on the line or have those hard conversations, then the emotional part is like, I'm just a task taker. I'm not really a head of a product. I'm a bit of a fraud, but I have to keep my job and feed my family. And so I just got to do what I'm told. So there's this, at least for me, those three conflicting.
So I want to piggyback. I want to piggyback because I totally agree, and I think I would add one more thing to that second scenario. In addition to feeling like you're just a task taker, I would say that for me, the reason that also can feel, it's almost like a lose-lose sometimes in these situations. Both have emotional downsides. The first one is I can go to bat and disagree and maybe lose my job. But the second scenario is I can just roll with it. Sure, maybe I'm a little bit of a task taker, but I'm like a yes person to the CEO, which is not always like a bad thing to be seen as.
True.
But if it doesn't work, I'm on my neck is on the line, and then I could lose my job too because I failed to like execute on what they what they want to do, which is something I currently think is a bad idea. So it's almost like, do I delay the conflict, or do I delay the potential like moment of truth until the thing fails after I try my best to make it work, even though I thought it was predestined to not work? Or do I have that battle now, disagree now, and avoid wasting time on something that I think is not a good idea? So to me, I actually don't think there's a safe option. It's almost like and I think that's why it might feel emotionally destabilizing, is because your livelihood is almost like on the line in either direction.
Yeah. Yeah, because to pull on that second thread, that if you do what you're told, there's a level of like your career story, or what do you tell that next job, or what do you like, getting a little too emotional, what do you sleep well at night? Like you knew that was a bad idea. You didn't stand up for it. You created it. And then Mark is like, why did you build that? Why does that app look like a complete hodgepodge of stuff? Like we've all seen, I don't know, let's pick on Zoom, like all the different menus. And it's been well-meaning product managers with their OKRs adding their thing because that was their job, but not thinking through what is valuable to a customer, having the guts to have those conversations and push for the value for your customer, and then continue to push on that versus constantly switching directions.
Yeah, I think the thing that was like also like taxing and emotional for me too is and I feel like I'm like putting my reputation and social capital on the line too, especially for the team that I'm working with, right? Like if we've started working on something, all of a sudden we have to scratch it, right? I almost felt like I was failing my team.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, like you're not able to stand your ground with the CEO, and therefore we cannot have as much impact as we like to, because every time we're making progress, we have to start over. And it's almost like, I'm almost creating like a bad reputation for myself as someone who cannot deliver the thing because we're constantly changing. And I think that to me was like very taxing. And similar with like in the exec team, right? If the CEO is constantly rewriting my decisions or my plans, does that mean the CEO doesn't trust me implicitly, right? And I think that's also like emotionally taxing too when you think about like your social capital and influence in that table with other execs.
Agree with you. I mean, to build on that, as you get on the executive team, I think the mind shift that I needed to make for myself is I was always really good at building, at working with product, with design, with engineering, like even in the interview questions, like name a time when you didn't get along with a designer. I'm like, I can't. I can tell you other departments I disagreed with and tell you that story. But with the builder team, we would get together, we would have shared ownership. But then your expectation, when you're on the executive team, is that change of that becomes your first team, like the head of sales, the head of marketing, the CEO, the chief operating officer. And so you shift to making decisions with them and understanding how those players fit into moving the company. And frequently you haven't hired most of those people, and you all report to the CEO. So it just becomes a very different dynamic.
Yeah. So maybe like now I think what will be like interesting and fun, at least for me, is so let's say you're like, maybe like, let's play it out, right? Let's say you have that CEO who, all of a sudden, had a weekend or went to a conference, comes back and be like, okay, like I think we're heading the wrong direction. Scratch our 6-month roadmap. I think we should put our resources under this new initiative. And we may break down like what are your options? Like what are the next steps, right? Because I think we were talking about like you could argue and be like, hey, I don't think this is the right direction. You could agree with them, but like, yeah, like how should you, like, you're in that situation, like what is the first step that you recommend people taking?
Yeah. The first step I'd recommend is listening. So you might have the narrative in your head of this is dumb, and keep that in your head and keep it playing, but don't let it play out in the conversation unless you have the valid evidence in the moment. And listen. After listening, ask questions, ask those initial questions of the who, the what, the where, the congruency to what you're building, what's behind that initial thinking. And then a level of let it play out. Are they going to mention it again? Is there other threads in that initial conversation for you to pull on? Because I think Ben mentioned that sometimes the calibration is around like, is this a conversation? Are we talking about baseball and it's a passing phase? Or is this a signal for us as a company? Because the way that I think about it is the other stakeholders, CEOs included, their roles tend to be much more outward facing, and they tend to be in circles that you're not. So we're in product circles, we hang out with designers and engineers. CEOs are with VCs, they're with the media, they're in conferences around what their peers or other companies are doing. So they might be getting a signal that you are not in the conversations you're having. First, discerning and understanding what that might be, to me, feels like a good starting point.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that. And I think in my head, I think about it like almost like start by playing it back to them. So,
Exactly.
here's exactly what I'm hearing, right? So I'm hearing there's this thing that just happened, blah, 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 kind of just like you're describing. Here's exactly the details of what you just told me. And then what I'm hearing is that you want to, with me, think through how can we change the way we've been thinking about investing our resources over the next X number of weeks or months, because some assumption we had or hypothesis we had is either no longer true or we don't want to pursue it. And there's actually a different set of assumptions we're operating with, or a new hypothesis that we're really excited to pursue. And then just, am I missing anything, right? Does that all sound right? Am I overlooking anything? Are there any other constraints or considerations that kind of drove you to want to talk to me about this? Am I right in assuming that you want to think through it together versus you just want me to go heads down and put together a plan for you? So just kind of like calibrating on like the meta conversation. That's all assuming obviously the CEO is interested and capable in having that kind of level-headed discussion and
That's
wants to take the time to talk to you in that way. Right.
Absolutely.
So this is stuff that I think mostly should get sussed out in the interview process, because I personally don't think you want to go work for a CEO who doesn't want to have thought partnership conversations with you, unless for some reason you do want that job, but that's not the job I've ever wanted.
Yeah, I think we can get into reverse interviewing and how do you think about that first step and finding the company where you, for your work style, would thrive, with the caveat that the interviews are like a first date. Everyone's on their best behavior and looks nice and talks well about the relatives and the grandparents. And then you get into the organization, you're like, oh, all right, this is where we are.
Yeah. The other thing, Mark, I'm thinking about as we're talking through this is because Mark and I we're like partners on the podcast. We have a couple other projects we're thinking about together right now. And obviously there's no reporting relationship. We're just partners, on equal partners. And I think one of the reasons, and we do disagree. So sometimes Mark takes one side of an argument, I'll take the other side. And I'd never feel like emotionally triggered by those disagreements, potentially because there's no hierarchical relationship.
Yeah.
And I do wonder sometimes how much the fundamental hierarchical relationship is at the root of why the conversations in like a full-time job, but like a boss can feel triggering in a way that they wouldn't if you were just like having the same exact conversation with, like, if Mark just came back from a conference and he was like, I think we should completely change the podcast in this direction, I wouldn't be like emotionally triggered by that. I'd be like, oh, interesting. Let's talk about it.
Have a conversation. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think depending on the hierarchy combined with the person's self-awareness, their financial position, it could be a really difficult conversation. And Ben, to your point, what makes it so emotional? And frequently it's not. At the end of the day, a CEO is a CEO and you're an employee, unless maybe you're a co-founder, and those could be different relationship dynamics.
Yeah. I'm imagining, because what I've learned over time is I'll have conversations with people and I'll link them to certain episodes because I'll feel like we talked about something that is very relevant. So I do spend some time advising some founders and sometimes as CEOs too. And I imagine sometimes they might be like, hey, how should I like better navigate conversations with my head of product when I have new ideas? And I might be like, link them to this episode. So if we were to like role play for a second and switch to putting ourselves in the shoes of the CEO, Elena, I'm curious, like, if you could give advice to a CEO on how to approach that conversation with their head of product when they have a new idea, is there anything you would tell them on how to set up that conversation for success to like increase the chances they actually get what they want out of that conversation?
Okay. It's I think I'm going to say it's a good question for the third time in a row, but that one it is an interesting one. I think the first one that comes to mind is think about how you got there. So you got there by talking to a lot of people who've told you no, and you've ignored the no's, and so you've got here, you've gotten to your level of success. So there's a switch that has been switched off to resonating a no as a no. And I think that's where a lot of the friction comes in. So now you've hired people, you have some sense of how good they are, because there's another piece where, as a Series A startup, it's this level of people, and then Series B, and then you hire someone who can do that next stage. But you have some level of, you've hired them, you have some trust in them. So can you move your relationship to, this person is likely trying to do the best for you and the best for the company? So they're not saying no without that reason. The third one is understand that you are either the highest paid person in the room or the most listened to, most powerful person in the room. So that means a lot of people will feel like they can't say no to you, and that could be detrimental to your business. So if you are doing something dumb, or or if you want to have a conversation with your team, and you might not, and that's fine too, or that's different. But if you want to have more of that partnership relationship, give your team space and model that conflict or conversation. So an example, if you're coming into a room and you're saying, we're doing this, it's going to be very hard for anyone else to say, hey, can we have a discussion about this? Versus,
can we pump the brakes on that? Sounds like no CEO ever wants to hear, hold on, let's pump the brakes on that idea.
Exactly, especially if you're in there being like, we're moving left, and everyone's like, well, I guess we didn't talk about it, let's go left. Versus, hey, I had a conversation, what are your thoughts on the following? Here's where some of the things that I'm seeing in the future, but I wrote up a document before we talk in our executive team meeting on Tuesday. Can you all read it and add comments and see what you think? And then once people add comments, don't tell them they're dumb, engage in those conversations. So if you want to model a culture where you have partnership, or you have conversations, or you want someone to engage with you versus just do what you tell them, model those conversations.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's helpful when I've had people do this well with me is like, one, like the empathy of, hey, like, I know like this is going to sound annoying, and I know you've put a lot of work to it, and like, I'm not attacking you as a person. I just, we're kind of rowing on the same direction. I think we both want the same thing, which is like win and build a successful company. So I just want to make sure like I'm coming from that angle, not as like you being the wrong person. And I think the thing that's helpful too is like, what is like your level of confidence and conviction? Because I think like the way I react to at 30% conviction is very different to 90% conviction, because I'm like, ooh, do I really want to like have a full-on argument and debate with when there's so much conviction behind that idea? So I think that's like something that's just helpful to calibrate, because I think that it's okay, I might be wasting my time if I like try to persuade someone who's like already doesn't take no as an answer, who's already so convinced, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that Mark, I think you raise another good point of just the volume. If you're 100% convinced about all the things you bring on the table, people will start zoning out, being like, all right, well, that person has another idea. Versus you come back and you're like, we need to pivot the company. Let's go. I'm not asking for a debate. Versus, have you thought about this? I'm not sure. I'm looking for your opinion.
Yeah. I think it's the boy who cried wolf is the problem with the first one, is because just people start tuning you out, and you lose your effectiveness. And I think the other thought that was coming to mind to me is, I know some of these really successful founder CEOs are also like, when I think about how they communicate big decisions to their board, for example, so they raise money and they've got a board, and the board is presumably full of really smart people. The most successful strategies I've seen is where let's say there's a big board meeting coming up. The CEO doesn't wait until the board meeting to present the idea. They basically sidebar with every single one of their board members multiple times if needed in advance of the board meeting. So everyone's had a chance to talk one-on-one, express their doubts. They go into the board meeting knowing the outcome in advance, and they just know where things are going to land. And I think that a CEO I don't see a good reason why the CEO shouldn't treat their leadership team with the same process. Talk to your leadership team, sidebar with everyone, make sure everyone's on the same page. Don't pull the trigger. Don't bring like major topics to the leadership team until you've talked to, like, into the group setting, until you've talked to people one-on-one. And I think what just like never feels good for anyone, I think, if a CEO is listening to this, is finding out about a major development in a room with other people who will be evaluating their response to that in real time, and not giving people a chance to at least sleep on a big piece of news one-on-one before like they have to maybe say something in front of other people. I think that social pressure can also be really destabilizing.
Yeah, I would agree with that and it also moves into how people process information. For me, I'm much better if you send me a pre-read that I can digest and then we have a conversation about it versus here's a big decision. I don't have any context around it, but we need to shift the company around that. And then it puts me a bit on the, like, I'm surprised. And then I don't have a response in the moment because I haven't had the chance to form either my own opinion about it, read any of the data, pull in the information to have that conversation in the moment. I can improvise, but that will be a different conversation.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, Ben, if you want to pull in something more here, but I was going to go like a different kind of direction of almost like walking through like the scenario that we started off. Okay, like the CEO has like this idea. And I think once you listen, I think kind of like a skill set that product leaders are very uniquely positioned to do. And I think they're really good at is like that almost like storytelling and like bringing order to chaos. So like almost kind of like coming up with like almost like a good way to think about like, hey, like here's this new thing and here's how it maps, and kind of like then bringing that back to almost augment the conversation with the CEO, maybe any other execs, but any advice on how to do that, of like how to you take this new information and then you go do the research and then put all those learnings and in a way that allows you to have a better conversation and maybe like land a decision.
Yeah, several. So first of all, starting with some of the things we've talked through, so how real is it? So the way I think about it from a framework perspective is ask the good questions. You'll get a lot of that sense of, is it an urgent opportunity? Does it align with what we're looking for in that initial conversation? So the way I like to think about that is, have you heard this before from the CEO, from other executive teams members, from the rest of the organization, or from customers, to understand some of those signals and how to map them? And then from that, another opportunity is to apply a horizons framework. If, let's take AI, for example, everybody's doing it in some level of bottoms up and really remaking the product itself, or adding some sort of veneer so that they can fit into what's being talked about right now. But there's a level of push from the CEOs of, we're going AI first, so everyone needs to vibe code, as an example. So if you start unpacking that, okay, the industry is going in that direction. We're getting signals that companies that leverage AI in product management and go to market are more effective. Okay, that's useful. What are some of the tools that are available to us? And then for an organization of our size, if it's 30 people, can we just talk amongst ourselves and see if we're already doing this, so we're already doing what the CEO is asking to do? Versus you're a huge organization, and so how do you even start? How do you get people moving in that direction?
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Mark and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
And then what I like to do is apply more of that horizons framework, where I think about the bet and the information that I have, and whether this bet is something that will help our customers like in the next 6 months. If we add an AI feature, will it help us grow because we'll have more social media presence, we'll have more PR? Or is it something that if we invest here, we'll be able to grow the share of wallet and how much people pay us for the functionality that we have? But it's a longer horizon investment. Versus, hey, we're going to just scrap everything we're doing as a company and make it AI native. That's going to take
Elena,
more
would you
time.
mind if I pulled up your, I have your Horizons framework pulled up. You mind if I just like screen share that for a sec? As
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sorry, just feel free to keep going, but I wanted to give the audience a visual, I think it's helpful.
Yeah. Or versus, hey, you're going to rethink your whole strategy, think through that innovator's dilemma and really outpace yourself because now there's AI native companies that are going to do what you do much faster in a much more native, effective way. And so that's probably not going to be something that pays off within this year, but it'll take longer. It will take a pivot for the company. And so once you've had some of those questions, some of that data back, you can start having the conversation that's much more based on trade-offs rather than, hey, Elena thinks this is a bad idea and Mark thinks this is a good idea. So you move from opinions to let's have a conversation, let's figure out what we know, let's figure out what we don't know, and what are some of the actions we take forward.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really about figuring out the exact next step, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of what I'm hearing is, and there's obviously a lot that goes in to your point that you got to triage and really figure out how you might frame a discussion about the next step. But my guess is most CEOs don't want the first reaction to be this like knee-jerk reaction to completely redirect the Titanic 90 degrees relative to where it's going. They probably want to figure out how to get ahead of it or start thinking about it or figure out what the next step is or just start rolling the ball in that direction. Maybe like stripping out a tiny amount of the resources into a new exploratory area and just like poking around. So trying to figure out like that. I like this Horizon framework because when I think about a lot of the 0 to 1 work that I've been pulled in to help with, it's in that Horizon 3 bucket.
Yeah.
However, what I find tricky, and I think I'm forgetting who had the post on it. It might have been a Shreyas post, but I think there's this weird organizational incentive problem when someone is asked to do 0 to 1 work on Horizon 3. They often still get evaluated internally by the same standards used to evaluate people who are working on Horizon 1, like things that move revenue, and Horizon 2, like growth and expansion stuff. And I think that is something that I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on that, but I find that to be unfortunate. And also, if I'm honest, a little surprising, right? Because like often the CEO, founder CEO, is a 0 to 1 person. Like they did go from nothing to like something substantial, and now they want to explore new 0 to 1 work. But I'm not talking about Series A companies right now. I'm talking more about like the C, D, E, like later stage companies, maybe even publicly traded companies. If you're on the ground as a PM, focus on a really important CEO level 0 to 1 project, you'll like many people around you will still evaluate the impact of that initiative by the same standards that they evaluate more mature products, and the CEO doesn't fix that culturally a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like as a product leader, you probably want to have a portfolio of bets in different parts of the horizon. And I think as long as there's like understanding and agreement on like kind of the allocation for each of those horizons, I think that's fine. I think your question is a little bit trickier on like, how do you, like, that's a little bit of like my beef with a lot of the PM career ladders, so that they're just generalized, but it's not super helpful to be used when you have like specialized PMs, right? Like you cannot evaluate like a growth PM the same way you're evaluating a platform PM, right? Like maybe there are like, let's say you have 6 competencies, maybe like 3 of the ones like stay the same. Like you have to have good judgment, like good product sense, but like, there's some others that like your job are just fundamentally different. And I think that's also true for 0 to 1. And so I don't know. I think it's tricky, and I don't know if I have a good answer. It almost feels like you should have like specialized career ladders, but then I think a lot of people don't even, like a lot of product leaders don't even know like what great looks like for all those different specialized functions. But
yeah. So Elena, going back to this like example that we're navigating, the simulated example. So once you like triage what horizon it is, and you can maybe like figure out what that next step is in that direction and align on it with the CEO, anything come to mind for like, do you just execute and make sure you have really tight feedback loops and keep checking in, let them know you're making progress on it? Is there anything that you would say is like the right kind of way to proceed past that, a very initial starting point?
Yeah, let me circle back to that, but I wanted to add to the career ladders frustration. So I think the only framework that I've seen that addresses that, I think it was in LinkedIn, the tours of duty framework, where you can be taken out of whatever role you are, do something, and it's pre-set up with your manager that you're going to be doing that. So that framework tends to be with product operators who want to try product management in large companies. But I do agree that in both larger, medium-sized, and larger companies, you're evaluated for okay, you do your one little thing, then you get promoted, you do two things now, and then you get promoted, and then you do three things and you manage people. So it is a level of like a reverse pyramid of you get more ability to impact the company, but it doesn't reward the person who can do the 0 to 1s, the add new revenue lines to a company, because you tend to be a really great individual operator who can go in there, figure out what needs to be done, break it down, do it, and then get to revenue, but that will take longer. So then in your evaluation, your performance evaluation, unless you've pre-agreed with your manager that those are your outcomes, you frequently get the opposite. And that's why so many of them really great 0 to 1 operators, I would say, find a different role in a startup environment from what I've seen.
It's almost like that's part of the innovator's dilemma, is like why companies struggle to innovate is because there's basically like very little incentive for the most talented people inside mature organizations to take all that risk to like internally, right? I'll just go work on the safe win.
Exactly, because that's what gets rewarded in that organization.
Yeah, just last comment there too. I think like also I think the consequences of how like a lot of these big companies do 0 to 1, like it almost rewards the person building something, getting something out the door, as opposed to like actually like driving outcomes and making the best use of company funds. Because like I think like a lot of times like at 0 to 1, like the best outcome is deciding, hey, actually, we shouldn't pursue this. We tried this, the market didn't pull. I think we're better off like investing those resources into the main thing, right? But I think because the way like these career ladders are done, and you have to keep like hit this OKRs, whatever, you have to have something to show. It doesn't really reward that person, or there's no really incentive for that person to do that. Which,
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, especially like you did a thing, it didn't work. You did an experiment with the least amount of resources. So you did the right thing, and you did the right thing by communicating we shouldn't pursue this. And yet, because you didn't reach a revenue outcome or a growth outcome, that's considered a negative, even though it was a positive for the company.
I feel very seen by this. And I think, I have been tasked with, I've done lots of 0 to 1. Like, look, most 0 to 1 work doesn't actually work. Like most of it will fail. It's just like the nature of taking high risk bets, right? And I've been handsomely rewarded for failed things by some people, by some leaders. And then I've been handsomely penalized for failed 0 to 1 experiments by some people. And when I think about the difference is I think if I'm trying not to get into throw anyone under the bus specifically, but let's just say if there are executive sponsors for certain initiatives, 0 to 1 initiatives, who think that who take the conclusion that we gave this a real shake and there's not a there, so we shouldn't invest in this more, they take that as a failure. And not just a failure.
And they give you the risk rather than themselves.
They're like, we just have to make it work. Right. And you're like, well, that's not how this works.
That's another one. Yeah.
Like we have a hypothesis. We tested the hypothesis. I feel really good about the execution on the testing of that hypothesis. We could keep trying, but I don't have confidence that it's going to go where we need it to go. So it might be time to reevaluate. And then what they hear, I think, is this isn't the right product leader for this. Like the right product leader for this would make it work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have been in that position of being seen as like the less capable product leader, even though, I know that we did that. We there's not a there. And having left, not going to say which company this is, there wasn't a there, right? So even after I left and they put someone else in the seat, didn't happen either.
They didn't find it either.
Yeah. It's funny. This is so connected. This is so connected to how we started the conversation, right? And I think that, like, if you think about it, like founders at the end of the day, they're the ultimate like pros of going 0 to 1, right? Like they had to force themselves to go to product market fit. And I think that's actually like where a lot of tension happens when they hire a product person that maybe hasn't done 0 to 1 or comes from like a bigger company where they were shielded from that, right? And it was more of, hey, like you have this scope of things, we have this plan, you have to hit this plan, right? And I think when you have a leader all of a sudden be like, sunk cost fallacy, like I never met them before, right? Like we're going for it. Like I don't care how much I prioritize doing the right thing as opposed to like just keeping my word or like sticking to a plan. That's more important because this is my baby and I wanted to see it prevail in the world.
I agree with that. Yeah. And right now I teach a class, develop CPO level skills. And one of the modules is influence. And it's all about what is the context of the person you're speaking to. And so in Ben's case, in my case, and I can go through my example, the context is this needs to work. And so how do you have the conversation of it's not working in that context? Or can you give that person a save face option, which might not be this one, that still makes that person look good in front of their colleagues or the condition set that they have? And sometimes the answer is no, is something to try that people have been successful with. That said, in my situation in the company that I'm also not going to mention, we also delivered an outcome. It was a revenue positive outcome. And the feedback was you moved so fast that like the quality of the product wasn't where we needed it to be. And I'm like, we still got the $10 million, right? This is still a 1 month project that we're going to remove. So I agree with you, but is there either an accountability for that, or does that get counted in my performance review, or how do those pieces fall together?
Yeah, like finding an off ramp almost, right? Like how do we find like some way to get off of the path we're on that still feels like a win to everyone? And it's challenge. That's challenging.
It's challenging. Yeah, and
I'm
emotional.
not gonna say it's easy.
Yeah.
It's funny like how it almost sounds as I'm hearing this 60, maybe I don't know what the exact number is, but probably more than half the problem that we're describing can be solved by like finding the right opportunity in an environment where there's just like a really good match, right? Because I think like from those examples, like it's very clear that different companies and different leaders prioritize like different things, right? And I think of course, I think if you can align it to what you're good at, what your skill sets, and that is amazing. But even let's say you made a miscalculation, or you just didn't have the insight or like the thought to check that first. It sounds like a lot of it goes back to kind of like always knowing, hey, what does this person value above anything? Do they value being right? Do they value like revenue? Do they value like craft? And I think like always having those lenses and remembering that, I think will probably set you up for success. You might be miserable while you're doing it, but at least you know what it takes to do well in that job or position. So yeah, maybe to finish this example, like I think like the last piece, I think that you mentioned in your article, it's about like basically like the switching cost, like iceberg framework, or like, and so maybe like I think there's like 4 or 5 elements to consider there. I think it just like makes it like, or just like super helpful, like almost things to consider when making that decision. So yeah, maybe Elena, do you mind just walking us through like what are those different levers?
Yeah, so I think starting with like optionality versus commitment. Can you have a conversation and figure out what is the smallest test you can do to figure out if there's a there, and really get into a cadence where you're testing and bringing back the results and having the right decision heuristics with the team that you're working on this. So that might be, hey, I need a couple of developers and a designer. We need a quarter to evaluate this and we'll get back to you. So some of that back and forth. So you set both the parameters, how you're going to make a decision, and then how much you're going to invest in it is a good starting point. The other piece for me is like making the trade-offs visual. So we all have our product roadmaps. They're all wonderful. They're all going to land. But then when somebody adds a thing to it, it obviously can't fit into the number of people you have to do things. So what's worked for me is having that conversation of, hey, which one do you want me to take off? Is it this one? Is it this one? All right, this one is going to get us 15 million in revenue. This one's going to reduce our operation costs, so it's going to save us 15 million. And this one, if it works, 3 years from now, we'll probably be entering a completely different multi-billion-dollar market. But if it doesn't, we don't know. We won't know in the next couple of quarters. So having that, so it's not just my opinion versus my CEO's opinion or the head of sales opinion, but being like, oh, for the head of sales, hey, if they don't do this, we're not going to land Salesforce or another large client. Oh, maybe we shouldn't do AI agents quite yet. And you start having a conversation about more concrete things versus opinions. So I think that, like, a mentor of mine called it the framework drowning puppies, where it's like, well, that one's really cute and that one's really cute too, and you really love it. And that kind of makes it a bit more visceral in the conversation.
That was honestly like my favorite like trick for driving decisions when I had to, like, I was basically like, I want to give someone like a menu with 3 options, and I'm gonna recommend, here's my favorite option, here's why. And I think just like having those very clear things. So here are kind of like the pros and cons of each of the options, right? And I think here's what I recommend, but I defer to you because you seem to have a very strong opinion. And I think just putting that person with all that information and delegating decision making, I think built more empathy, be like, oh shit, there's all these trade-offs that I hadn't considered that now I have to make, and it's just not really as straightforward, right? So I think that really helped. And I really like the line items that you had in your kind of like menu. Like one of it was like the sunk investment costs, like the restart cost, another one, completion cost, of course, revenue impact, team morale. I think that's like a huge one that I think a lot of times like the CEO doesn't really like think a lot about, but it's actually pretty important. So it's just like, hey, like you actually want to use your team morale bullet on this thing, or like just, again, like it's, you can only do these changes so often before like the team starts to feel burnout and maybe doesn't enjoy working in this company in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And team morale is a huge one for me as a manager, as a head of product. The biggest thing for me is that people want to work with me again. And so that has happened company to company. And that was probably the biggest career value or happy point for me, that there are people in past organizations that want to work with me again that I can recruit. And your superpower there is people as well. Like if you can't, like frequently you get into a situation and the first thing that's asked of you is like, oh, we have a B team or whatever other team. So for whatever reason, you've been hired to make this team better, either by coaching them or by bringing in additional people. And so if you don't have the relationships and that network beforehand, it's something that I spend a lot of investment in. It's going to be significantly harder from a startup cost for you. But every time at a company, when you have a direction and you switch that direction and you don't give your team that hit, or that, like, I've shipped something that adds to their value, adds to customer value, they lose trust in you. And that feels awful. And so then why are you doing it? Is it the right reason? Do you, with all your data, with the information you have, with the conversations you've had with the team, truly believe that this direction is the right direction? And if your team comes with you, that's a very important signal. Otherwise, is there a way to make this bet, like with a sub team or a new team or a part of somebody's time, in a way that still moves the initiatives people have sunk 6 months into forward, or to some level of completion?
Yeah, I think CEOs, I can totally empathize with CEOs who can get frustrated, I think, with that the presentation of the menu options and being told we got to kill one of these puppies, or like there's something you care about that we can't do. And I've worked with multiple CEOs who, when you present these options, are always like, I want both, like we should figure out a way to do both. And like, I get it. And I get the desire to have that, but I don't know. I think at the same time, I think the point you made earlier, Elena, is really valid, which is like these successful founder CEOs especially are used to having people say no to them, and are used to being told there's only this much that you can do, or there's like some constraints that are not possible to overcome. So to have some person who they hired tell them you can't do this thing with your own company, I think can feel kind of, frustrating to a founder CEO who's like, I don't accept that.
Yeah.
Do you have any like, before we keep going, any thoughts on, and Mark, I'm curious if you do too, but just like on how to navigate, I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but like now that we're here, like any other tips on how to maybe navigate those
Yeah,
moments?
so that has happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to you, Ben, in that I want both scenarios. So the way I continue that conversation is like, well, anything is possible if I get more time, more money, or more resources. Like, if we do both of these things, they will both take longer with the current resources, or we can staff an additional team, or we can allocate to make this one of the two move slower and this one move faster. So there's several parameters that you can work with. And then the last one is quality. We can vibe code this or an equivalent. So it will work with a certain set of parameters. Like it'll work for only 10 clients if they load, let's say, 50 of these things on it. Above that, we don't have the investment in infrastructure. So we cut out some of the hardening, some of the quality initiatives that would move this forward. That I've used that and it's worked, and it's dangerous because at that point, when they see the demo environment work, they're like, it just worked. I just shared it with a reporter. It's working. And you're like, yeah, the 10 minutes works for one client. It works with the specific script that you used. It works. But we've punted the investment cost, the 3 months investment cost to get there and get there quickly. And so the other places where I think I've made a mistake, but to get to a place where a CEO wanted faster, and that's through team heroics. Like you can move faster if everybody works nights and weekends, the 996, and ship to really quick deadlines. And then the team feels great. The team morale's great. Everybody's shipped. Everybody came together. You got rid of all the other stuff that's plagued us and you've delivered. And that feels good. And once in a while, it's very useful and very energizing. However, if the CEO is like, oh, well, they can ship things like that, and it becomes a pattern, that's when people burn out. That's when the hardware starts to fall down. That's where you get more escalations that start to creep in. So for when you pull out the heroics, there's a level of a time and a place. And as the head of product, making sure that that doesn't become a pattern and constantly having those conversations that tend to
Like the fire
bite you in your
drills.
ass.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like every time you do one of those heroics, you're taking out like debt of like energy. Right? It's almost like similar to like tech debt, you're taking like human debt. And I think it's like, hey, is this really like, like we can push, but like we're gonna have to give people time to recharge. Otherwise, like it's just not. We're basically gonna deplete everyone's battery to the point that we're gonna fall apart.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
it's like pulling an all-nighter as an individial. Totally. Like you can only pull so many all-nighters before you're just like toast for a while. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Exactly.
Unless everyone's like 18, right? And then it's a different story. But then I don't know. Like it's a good idea to have a company full of 18 years old. But I think back to your question, Ben. I think to me, like it's bringing that menu back again, right? And be like, hey, you're just like moving the conversation forward. Be like, cool, like we can try to do these two things, but here are kind of like the different options of doing these two things. We can invest more in this and this, and it's like always surfacing like those concerns and those risks. So like you have all that information on the table and you're making like a well-informed decision and maybe surfacing things that person knows that maybe you don't know and vice versa. It's almost kind of like how can you create a facility and an exercise where like all information is on the table.
And I think it's a scoping. You could rescope. Like that's another lever is just say we could do both, but maybe just rescope the way we're thinking about them so that more fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think like, creativity is like, you can be most creative when you have constraints, right? And I think like a lot of it's like, you gotta keep like, you gotta know what your constraints are. So then you can actually come up with a good option, because if you have too many variables and it's too expansive, then that's when you like get stuck in that like decision paralysis and for too long when, you probably would have been better off by like just picking an option and see what happens.
Yeah. One of the stories I had in my career is I was a general manager of local businesses at Nextdoor. And so we got it from 0 to 1, 0 to 10 very quickly. It took us about 3 months to get a way for local businesses to sign up and interact with customers. However, 6 months into it, I did have to put on the brakes and have a conversation with our board of the next quarter. We're not going to release any features. We're going to focus on quality. And so some of the metrics there are uptime, are how many tickets that we get, the subs that we have. So really took the conversation back into the metrics that they care about, the PR and the perception of the company, but still having delivered very quickly an experience that started and became like 30% of Nextdoor's revenue. But having that, like, all right, I delivered it, but now let's have a conversation that we didn't want to have 6 months ago.
Yeah, I love that. Just presenting those trade-offs. Hey, we'll get to market fast, we'll ramp, and then we're going to have to spend some time fixing some stuff that we might not be super proud of in that first round. And I don't know. I don't know anyone who's experienced in our world who thinks there's anything that comes for free in this and road mapping or planning or strategy. Like everyone knows there's some trade-off. Anyone who's been around the block knows there's some trade-offs. And I guess the one thing I just want to call out as we're talking through all this is like how much of what we're talking about is all like in the building work that is not about like literally delivering, like talking to customers and like staying in touch with the market, like all this overhead of doing the job that we're talking about. And again, like it is the job, right? There's a reason this function exists, but like it's just occurring to me how much time is spent on this like inside the building stuff versus kind of outside the building when in these moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the amnesia too, like you could have the conversations, but because there's so many shiny things, like how quickly people forget that there are costs. So I think, Ben, I agree with you that people understand that there are costs, but they forget that there are costs. And so when you get something for free, you a level of forget that you have to pay for it. So when you get your invoice, you're like, oh, well, okay. But is it really the value that I thought it was going to be? And then you have another stressful conversation.
But to your point, Ben, I think that's where the product leader can be helpful, right? Like I think the way we started this conversation is the CEO has maybe a gut feeling that, hey, this is the direction we need to go. That feels very much like internal, right? Like I've brought this company to product market fit. I have a really good understanding of the user. I also understand the market, where it's heading. I talk to VCs, I talk to my board. So like, even though like a lot of the insight probably comes from out of the board, like I think they probably, a lot of times what I've, in my experience, they're not able to articulate that, but they just have like, oh, this gut feeling, like this is the right thing to do, even though like it's all all the information has been processed externally. And I think where product leaders can be really helpful would be like, cool, let me go prove or disprove that this gut feeling that you have is actually like there. And I think that's like where you can almost have a lot of your, like, assuming you work for someone that actually values the truth and kind of understands the importance of talking to users and understanding the market, which if you don't, like, that's a separate conversation that we should have. But yeah, I think you can go and bring in, be like, hey, like I actually went, did my homework, talked to a bunch of users, and here's what I'm hearing. And I think that's actually like where you add the value, I think, to the company, in my opinion.
Yeah, agree. And I think even if that person doesn't value all the things that you mentioned, they have a different set of either ways of looking at the world that's different from you. And so just like Marc and Ben, you were talking to each other, when one of you disagrees, you bring in a point of view and you talk about it. So there's a level of foundation where I have someone on my team who's valuable. They think differently than I do. Let's talk about it. Which is different from, I'm a dictator and I've hired people so they do the things that I do, which is also a very valid context and many people find themselves in. But then it becomes less emotional if you're like, all right, I have a dictator. I'm here to get paid to do what they tell me. And that is what I will do. So it's different contexts, but if it's quacking, it's a duck. So if you are like, all right, this is a duck, it makes things less emotional. So one of the things we talk through is burnout. Like there is a level of, you can't change something that is from what it is, and you will sleep better at night if you're like, this is what it is. How
That's a
can
good
I
note.
work and be effective in this versus, okay, I can't. How can I figure out my exit plan and interview and have the conversations and find the place where I am effective and happy at the same time?
So that would be the part two. we're teasing
Yeah.
the part for I
That's
think
right.
that'd be a
That's
really
right.
fun conversation. This has been awesome. Maybe two final questions for you, Elena. One is like, where can people learn more about kind of the work you do, your writing, all that stuff? And we'll make sure to link it in the notes. And then, so that's question one. And then question two is like, how can our audience be helpful to you?
Yeah, the first one is I write about a lot of these things, including what we just talked through on Elena's letters. It's a Substack. And then I teach, develop CPO level skills where we focus on go to market, financial acumen, executive presence, and influence, a lot of these conversations. And then I've just launched AI powered executive communication, where we talk through executive presence, building communication systems for you so you're not copying and pasting, but you have an AI do that. And then also, how do you represent your company on social media, at industry conferences, panels with investors? So you move from being a great operator to representing your company.
Very cool. And how can, in addition to just checking all those things out, anything else that the audience can do to be helpful to you?
Yeah, definitely reach out and tell me what you're going through. This conversation started because of me talking to folks in Marc's Supra community. So getting those questions gets me prompted to think about them and have those conversations. So please reach out.
Amazing. This is a lot of fun. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thanks for having me.